right, so I've got an embroidery project here, and I did a running stitch around the outside with my magenta thread, and now I'm going to add some more. I think I want to go with this orange. It'll look nice with the pink. And I'm going to thread my needle. Could use a little piece of paper. Pass it through the eye of the needle to get the thread through. And I want about an arm's length. I can always get another piece, but if it's too long, it'll be cumbersome. And I tie a knot, twist, push into my finger so I can get it through that loop, and boop. And I like to go ahead and do a second knot just in case, to really make sure it anchors my thread. All right, I want to make another circle around here, but this time, instead of doing a running stitch, I'm going to do a back stitch. So first, just like the running stitch, I'm going to start with a regular stitch like this. But now, instead of leaving a small space between, I'm going to watch my little shark fin, and I'm going to go about the same length, boop, boop, that I did before. So the whole length of a stitch this way, because this is where the back stitch gets its name. I'm going back into that spot. So watch that again here. I'm going to go a whole stitch away, and then back. And I want you to see what happens on the other side, right? If I want, I could guide that thread so that it pokes right through it and really keeps it in place. You don't have to, but just something to think about and notice. And then again, a stitch away, and back through the same hole. This is kind of relaxing because there's definitely a rhythm to it. The more you get used to it, the faster you get at it, but it's not a race. Especially in the beginning, you want to try to take your time, pay attention to what you're doing, start noticing what's happening with the thread. And I am okay with these circles being imperfect. So if I wanted them to kind of come out just right, it would make sense to trace very lightly with a pencil or one of those special markers that the ink kind of disappears with a little bit of time with the air. I could use those to make the circles that I want. And then that way I know exactly where they are. But I'm okay with this being kind of freehand, kind of not so perfect. And something to note, it's good not to have too much extra fabric because sometimes you can accidentally sew your fabric onto the back. So just be mindful of that as well. You can see how this stitch kind of makes more of like a solid line than the running stitch. So that's why a lot of times people will use it to outline a shape or to write something. It's kind of like we're drawing with thread. All right, so I'm starting to get to the end of my thread, which is okay. I have more of it. But what's really important is that I need to tie it in a knot in the back. So I think I have enough space for one more stitch. Actually, I want to put this one a little more that way. There we go. I'm going to bring it through just like usual and then turn it around. And I want to anchor that by, I need to tie a knot onto here. So I have to bring this around, okay? And now here's our special moment where we've got that loop right here. So I can just I can even hold this and take the needle out and bring that loose thread through that little loop, and it'll make a little bit of a knot there. Now, if you want it to be more secure, right, it kind of depends what you're gonna be doing with this. If it's just like a piece of art hanging on the wall and no one's gonna mess with the back of it, it should be fine. But just in case, I like to put a double knot. So I had to pass that through so that I made a loop again. And then passing the loose thread through that loop. And I bring it together here until it ties into a knot. Okay, and I don't really like how that knot turned out because I've got the knot here and the knot here. So again, I'm gonna do it one more time, just to be sure. Pass it through, ooh, okay. And I've got my loop here, and now I'm gonna pass the loose thread through the loop, and boom, I think that I've got a tighter knot here. And I'm going to snip off the extra, not too close to the knot, because then it can loosen up easily, boop, and I'm ready to start again. So now I've got this cool almost finished circle with my back stitch, and I want to show you how to do something called a split stitch. So it's a lot like the back stitch, but it's going to look a little bit thicker. And I was going to go ahead and do that same circle all the way around, but then I thought, oh, it'd be kind of interesting if part of the circle had a thicker line. So let's cut some, thread our needle. And again, you could use the paper. You could also use the method where you kind of squeeze it between your fingers and have a tiny bit showing, and then you pass it through the eye of the needle. But the paper method works pretty well. And of course, I always need a knot. Loop. Pass the loose end through the loop and tighten. And I'm going to do a second one. Oops, there we go. All right, I want to continue almost like as if this stitch never stopped. So I'm going to take my needle whoop, and pass it through that same hole here. And so with, ooh, we had a problem here. It pushed some of the thread through or something. Oh, there we go. Boop. All right, so I'm going to do the same thing at first that I did with the back stitch, and the same thing with the running stitch, really. You should do your first stitch right here. And then just like the back stitch, I'm gonna go ahead a stitch. But this time, instead of going back to the same hole, I'm gonna go halfway. I'm gonna split that stitch in half. So you'll see here, it's gonna give us like a thicker line. So I'm gonna go ahead, but not a whole stitch length this time. Half of a stitch length, and then to the middle. And it takes a little more time because you're trying to kind of poke halfway through that thread too. So we're gonna go further out. Actually, not that much, because I kind of want it, the shorter your stitches, the thicker the stitch will be. So I'm going halfway into that last stitch. And it's kind of cool because using the same color, you can kind of see a little bit of the difference. There's a lot of similarity. Okay. But it's just slightly thicker. So if I'm going for a little bit more of a dramatic effect, it's kind of nice. And it almost looks a little bit like a braid. It's like sticking out of the fabric more. And I'm noticing that I'm actually going back into a hole from before, so if that helps you. And this is nice for curves too, because like I'm making smaller movements and I can make a curve more easily than if I did longer stitches. So out. And you can see it takes a little longer than the back stitch because we're having to add thread and we're making our stitches a little shorter at a time, but once you get the hang of it, it's not so bad. And again, I think it's so smart to just give yourself something that's simple. Like these circles, it's not a really complicated design. I'm not trying to like, you know, make all the details of a Pokemon character or something yet. Because when I'm learning something to start, sometimes picking something too complex can be really frustrating. So, you know, you got to be kind to yourself and think, what's going to help me learn the most right now? And then, of course, as you get a little more confident, it makes sense to challenge yourself. I love a good challenge, but sometimes, you know, you have to decide what makes sense for you with the skills you have at that time. So sometimes a challenge isn't the wisest thing because it's not what you need right at that moment. So you're the artist. You start to know yourself. Some people love a challenge right from the beginning and it works for them. And they're like, this embroidery is not going to get me, and they keep working at it. And when they get things that don't work, they actually just get more motivated. If that's you, great, go for it. I sometimes get frustrated if I'm starting something new. So I have a little bit of like perfectionism challenges where I'm like, I should just be able to see how it works and do it right away, which is very unreasonable. So I'm not being very kind to myself in those times. So I've had to learn how to tell myself it's okay not to be an expert right away and be comfortable with being a beginner when I've started something new. All right, so I'm just gonna add one more here to finish that off. Boop. So you can see here, it's like the line is very similar with these stitches. Here I've got the back stitch. You can see a tiny space in between. It's almost like running stitch with almost no space between, boop, 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 boop. And then as we get to that split stitch, it's like the thickness is pretty similar, except that it's sitting up more on the fabric. So it's just an interesting thing to think about. And if I wanted to make this section thicker, maybe instead of tying this off and you know, saving the thread for something else, I could come back through and put a stitch right next to it. So I kind of like that idea. I'm gonna try that out. Oops, what's going on back here? See, if something weird starts to happen, you kind of have to come back and investigate. Something is getting, oh, I think I went through, oh, there is a knot in here. So it looks like I might have to stop there. Oops, or I can try to very patiently untie that knot. I might be able to do it. But if not, I could just cut that off. And, oh, look at that. That's weird. Sometimes the thread gets so like tangly and twisted that it seems like there's a knot when there isn't. So you have to kind of go and investigate. It takes a lot of patience to do embroidery. So here I go. Gonna go a little bit ahead. Come back through the middle. I'm gonna do that split stitch. Just gonna add more thickness to this line that I have here. I want it to be like imperfect, like almost like I was using a pen and the ink got thicker in some spots and thinner in others. I think that'll be interesting. So remember, it's just like the back stitch where we come back, but instead of coming all the way back to that same hole, or to that same hole, we come further back halfway into the stitch from before. So we've got that. And that. Ooh, that's coming out cool. That really does look like a braid this time. Halfway in here. And I really want it to be like very close together. So you might notice that I'm like doing that shark fin thing again, because I want it to be like right next to where I had the stitch from before. So back through here. And even when I come to poke here, I'm kind of like pushing into that thread to guide it and keep it all like clumped together, because that's the look I'm going for. All right, I hope you have a lot of fun, a lot of luck as you explore the back stitch and the split stitch. And since you already know how to do a running stitch, you can practice all three and see what other things you can come up with. Like I did like a stitch right next to the other stitch. What else could you do to try some different things? Have fun.